Good afternoon from India. Good morning, good evening to all the participants from other countries. We welcome you to 68th ELTAI Webinar session. We welcome the speakers from Malaysia and Nepal and the moderator. I would like to request all the participants to watch a video of our association. Thank you, everyone. Now, I take this proud privilege to introduce the moderator of the session, Professor Paul Guanshekar, who is a vastly experienced materials developer, course designer, and teacher educator, educated in Bangalore and London. Professor Guanshekar served the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad for over 42 years. He was Proctor, Dean Publishing, and Dean English Language Education at the university and edited their ELT research journal, Languaging. He has conducted ELT workshops in 10 countries and presented papers at many international conferences, including those organized in Nepal and Malaysia. He is the Indian English consultant to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary and the online Oxford English Dictionary. Sir, may I please request you to take the charge of this ELTAI webinar session? Sir, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to welcome our two speakers to this very special ELTAI event, Professor Motikala Subba Dewan and Dr. Sivabala Naidu. It's a delight because they represent two countries that have had a strong historical relationship with India. The cultural ties in particular have grown over the years, and today we're looking forward to their perspective on the way English is taught in Nepal and Malaysia. And we in India and elsewhere, we have delegates from several other countries sitting in the audience today. We ought to be making notes about how those two countries compare with what's happening in our own nations. A quick word about what we're going to do for the next hour or so. I'll introduce the two speakers formally and then make a few introductory remarks, very brief introductory remarks about the event today, academic introduction really. And then I'll invite Professor Dewan to make her presentation first, and then Dr. Sivabala Naidu to follow. Once the two presentations are over, and they might take 15 to 20 minutes each to make their presentations, I'll return for a couple of minutes to wind up the session, as it were, and we'll then request Dr. Shravan Kumar to conduct the question-answer session. We may not have time for too many questions, but I'm sure he'll choose 3 or 4 that will be of great value to the entire audience today. And then there'll be a formal thank you from ELTAI before we wind up for the day. Right. Let me introduce a friend. I've known her for a long time now, Dr. Motikala Subba Dewan. She's the president of the Nepal English Language Teachers Association, or NELTA, and associate professor of English at Tribhuvan University. Interestingly, she's an advocate who practices in the Supreme Court of Nepal. She's a core member of the Asian Creative Writing Group. She's vice president of Yalambar Research Foundation and a board member of the Research Management Cell at the Ratna Rajalakshmi campus, Tribhuvan University. She is a TESOL certificate and advanced course trainer and a national professional translator and interpreter. As we would expect, she's presented papers in many national and international conferences and has conducted workshops and seminars. Recipient of several ELT awards, she has published several books and research papers in ELT and law in national and international journals. Welcome, Motikala. On to Dr. Sivabala Naidu.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. Dr. Naidu is currently head of School of Pre-University Studies, Taylor's College in Malaysia. Dr. Naidu holds a first-class honours degree in TESOL from the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow, the UK. His master's and PhD were in the area of sociolinguistics. He has extensive experience as an educator, having served in primary and secondary schools, and as a teacher trainer for TESOL. He also served as a secretariat officer for the English Language Standards and Quality Council, Ministry of Education, Malaysia, before joining the School of Education, University of Nottingham, Malaysia, as assistant professor. Dr. Naidu's training in TESOL and linguistics and his wide experience in different professional settings have provided him with a range of competencies, including the ability to plan, write, schedule, review, and budget projects in various education environments and frameworks. Might I add that Dr. Naidu is a Tamil speaker whose grandparents are from India. Welcome, Sivabala. Okay, a quick introduction, as it were, to the event. Can we have those 2 or 3 slides, please, Joseph? Thank you. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Now, the table here presents information that is in the public domain. I thought it would be useful for this international audience to get a kind of screenshot of what's happening there in terms of numbers. And I've always been fascinated with statistics and numbers. And not surprisingly, I follow cricket scores and statistics religiously. You'll notice population figures there. And just as a comparison, to scare some of the others from other nations, I've put in the figures for India. In Nepal, the number of languages, recognized languages that are spoken, the number of recognized languages that are spoken in Malaysia, vis-a-vis the 780 we have in India, according to the People's Linguistic Survey of India, right? And the status of the language or languages in these countries, the official language in Nepal is Nepali, but they do have a considerable, significant number of speakers of Maithili and Bhojpuri, etc. And in Malaysia, we have Bahasa Malaysia and, of course, Mandarin to represent the Chinese community there, and Tamil to represent the Tamil community. And interestingly, in India, Nepali is among the scheduled languages listed in the Constitution, right? And most of you know, of course, that English is the associate official language along with Hindi in India. Now, we're going to listen very keenly to their description of the status of English in terms of ESL and EFL in their own countries. Outside Nepal, we believe that they have a range of competencies from English as a second language, indeed, English as a first language, all the way through to English as a foreign language, right? In Malaysia, perhaps it's a little clearer because Dr. Naidu, I'm sure, is going to tell us that it is indeed officially a second language, and of course in India. Can we have the last slide, please, for the moment, Joseph? Right. Now, this is a kind of spoiler alert. I'm personally looking forward to responses to some of these questions. And I came up with these questions after discussion with 2 or 3 of our senior colleagues, what to expect. But this is not meant to tie our 2 speakers down to responding to all the 7. No, not at all. But a way of figuring out what to expect. Now, it'll be interesting, as I said, to figure out how many actually use English in terms of varying linguistic proficiency. We'd also be interested to find out how much of creative writing happens in Nepal and Malaysia in English, right? Principally because when a Nepali or a Malaysian or an Indian chooses to write in English rather than in their own L1, they're making a conscious decision and establishing yet another identity for themselves as part of a series of multiple identities. Question number 3, is there a correlation between linguistic proficiency and social progress, social status? We'd like to think there is, and we will hear about this particular aspect very soon. And not just the role of English in the country, within the country. How does proficiency in English enable us to establish links with the world in general, right? With this notion of globalization now taking strong roots all over the world. And what is the language of communication? Again, we'd like to believe that for historical reasons and very pragmatic reasons, utilitarian reasons perhaps, English has become the lingua franca in many, many countries. And we have some statistics to share with you if necessary later. And in particular, we'd like to know what's happening in school education in Nepal and Malaysia vis-a-vis the study of English, right? And we'd also like to know if English has been introduced, as we know, from the earliest stages in school education because of parental pressure, right? So was it merely altogether an academic decision, or was there an element of pressure from society? And lastly, we'd like to know how they went about business the last 18 months or so when the pandemic raged and is still raging in many parts of the world, right? So what kind of instruction modules, techniques, strategies have they developed, which I'm sure will be very useful to countries like India, where we're grappling with the possibility of continuing to use offline and online classes as a blend, even when the pandemic wears off. Right. Thank you for that. Can I now request Professor Motikala Subba Dewan to make her presentation? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Guanshekar, for your humble introduction. I'm very much honored. Thank you. And first, start my presentation. On behalf of ELTA, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to ELTAI and Professor Mohanraj Sathwalli for inviting me as a speaker to speak on these Asian perspectives on ELT in the ELTAI Webinar 68. It's my great honor to represent ELTA and to be part of this. And I would like to address the distinguished speaker, Dr. Sivabala Naidu, and also the esteemed delegates, participants from home and abroad, all the ELTA members. It's my pleasure to present in front of the galaxy of scholars. Namaskar and good afternoon from Nepal. And I would like to talk first in a brief about the status of English in Nepal. Nepal is a multilingual country, which is already stated in our Article 3 of the Constitution of Nepal 2015. We have 123 languages as spoken as a mother tongue in Nepal. It was a record from the 2011 of CBS. Newly, we have 6 languages are added by the government. That is, it is written, recorded by the Language Planning Commission's 2019. And that's why it reached to actually 129 ethnic language mother tongues, okay, in Nepal. Nepali is an official language, and 44.6% of total population speaks Nepali as their mother tongue. And actually, Nepalese population is, it's exceed to 3 crore 4 lakhs. I'm sorry, Professor, in your demographic, I saw 2 crores. So it's 3 crore 4 lakhs 474 recent data. And English is taught as a second language and also as foreign language. And it is taught as a subject as well as a medium of instructions. And English is introduced from the grade 1 in Nepal's schools. And yes, and when we talk of the speakers of using English in our country, we have 35.8% only they use English. And in the population, when we talk about, that's 10.7 million speak English in Nepal. So it's very less. And when we talk about the Education Act also, and about the language provisions, we see there in the section 7 of its subsection 1, the medium of education in a school shall be Nepali language, English language, or both languages. Again, but in the section 2 of this act, it says that nevertheless, anything contained in subsection 1, but the medium of education in a school up to primary level may be imparted in the mother tongue. It's very contradict. And while teaching only the compulsory subject of English language, that is the medium of education shall be English. That is the 7th amendment of this Education Act in 2001. So in practice, English and Nepali languages both are used as a medium of instruction in education along with the mother tongue. And it's very, very complicated kind of situation in our country. Only while we're teaching the English also, we can't use thorough English in class. We have to use mother tongue sometimes, or Nepali. Sometimes we use the Hindi also, because we have to bring some of the examples there. And the government doesn't have any clear policy about teaching English in our country. However, due to the actually request or high demand of parents, English is used as a medium of instruction in the private schools to teach all the subjects except Nepali. And to compete with the private school, even the community school, means government school too, tries to use English as medium of instruction. However, without a clear policy and the inadequate language proficiency of teachers and students, and schools are not able to achieve the outcomes expected by the curriculum. So we can take the examples comparing the result of secondary education examination, that is SEE, the board exam of the grade 10. Almost all the private school students pass English, many with high grades, whereas most of the students from the community schools cannot achieve the desired results. So this indicates a gap leading to higher education in teaching English. This will also lead the community schools products to be deprived of the various opportunities in life. And talking about the national policy 2019, it doesn't speak about much about the language, teaching English and either Nepali or any kinds of language, but it only envisions, okay, that education shall be compulsory and free basic, okay, education for all. So I think in Nepal, the talking about the status of English, it takes time to improve ELT situation in Nepal. And I would like to go to the next topic about the course materials in Nepal. And in Nepal, actually, the basic level education means it's 1 to 8th grade. So in between that, also primary education is called from 1 to 5 class, and lower secondary 6 to 8 class. So they are called basic level, and 9 to 12 is secondary level, and above from the 12 is called the university level. And who will develop the curriculums in the grades 1 to 12 and also the university and colleges? They the main authorized entity or organizations of the government is the CDC, that is the Curriculum Development Center. It develops the curriculum and textbooks for the grades 1 and 12, grades for all subjects. And they select the writer, contents of the textbooks, set the curriculum and everything. The private school also use the commercial textbooks published by the private publishers. The publishers have to make sure that those textbooks align the CDC curriculum and get approval before printing. And however, for the colleges and university, TU's subject committee will design or develop the courses and course books which are appropriate to the based on that Nepalese context. And talking about the strategies, okay, about the teaching strategies in our country, we follow the both traditional and the new teaching strategies. Traditional means is dominantly traditional, such as use of lecture method and grammar translation method, and the teaching basically focus on finishing the course on time and followed by the summative kind of evaluations. And new teaching strategies means it's a more preference is given for learner-centered approach of teaching rather than teacher-centered approaches and strategies. And communicative language teaching and task-based language teaching, and also problem-solving teaching method project-based and teaching and practical activities that already have started taking a shape in Nepal. And I would like to highlight on assessment or evaluations. Students are mostly subjected to take written tests of the summative nature with some flavor of formative test. The term ends exams and final exams are the most popular test taking place in Nepal. However, in university level, the semester system had adopted some degree of alternative assessment system also. For instance, teachers directly evaluate the students for 40% internal marks through quiz, presentation, term paper, and midterm exam, etc. And students are obliged to take centralized written test for 60% marks. So while considering the school level, they have started using different strategies for testing, for the evaluations. One of their fundamental strategies is maintaining a kind of students' portfolio. That's a new one, and especially in the private schools, particularly based on their formative assessments, monthly test, term end test, and final exams. The assessed papers of all these tests are maintained in a file for individual student and given the students or parents to review the mark sheet and portfolio. This provides ample opportunities for the teachers, students, and parents to discuss about the students' progress and learning outcome. The teachers assess the students for 25 marks, 9 to 10 grade, especially I'm talking about. For 4 skills, also unit tests, monthly tests, project works based on the units of every lessons as a part of formative evaluation, and the rest lies in the summative assessment. The examination is divided into actually first term, second term, and third term. But recently, government started asking school to also submit the 4 terms evaluations, like in the semester system in the university and colleges. And talking about the use of technology, I'm going to that part. And it has been increased in Nepal, the use of technology, and because teaching shifted from physical to virtual because of these pandemic situations. And in urban areas, due to pandemic, teachers are bound to, or they are obliged to go for online instructions and teaching. So they run classes through the Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet, etc. These are the popular actually apps in Nepal for teaching. And for the remote areas, we could say that the classes are run through the radio and televisions and phone calls, etc., through mobile. And some schools in Nepal in remote areas, okay, they also made some clusters of the students and teach students maintaining physical distance. So I don't want to talk long because we don't have much time, given time. And I would like to add here a little bit NELTA's initiatives to promote ELT during and after the COVID, because different webinars, online trainings, workshops are organized for the teachers, professional growth in Nepal by the NELTA, and Regional English Language Office, RELO, Nepal, okay, US Embassy, British Council, Ministry of Education, and governmental and non-governmental bodies. Also, they supported to run this kind of program to improve English, even during and that's a post-COVID situation. And COVID has really encouraged our teachers to learn how to use digital devices more efficiently in order to conduct virtual classes. NELTA, with its strong foundation or network and quality human resources across the country, has enhanced its role, particularly during and the post-COVID. It hosted a NELTA Thinking in 2020, a kind of international virtual conference to share the impact of COVID in education in different countries and their future strategies. I think Dr. Shravan Kumar was there from the ELTAI, and 15 countries participated in that thinking. And moreover, NELTA provided several workshops, trainings, and webinars. We know that in different parts of Nepal with the support of the local governments. Yes. However, there are certain challenges. Teaching in virtual mode is very, very challenging, and certain hours of power cuts every day, and problems in using digital devices because there is a lacking of knowledge of their use, even in the teachers and in the students. So still we are in the learning phase of this using a virtual kind of mode and apps. And I think because of this virtual online teaching, our listening skill is improved, our students, okay, and reading skill remain the same. I'm talking about the English teaching, and also writing becomes less and spoken is also less in virtual mode. So whether it is a kind of advantage or disadvantage, we could discuss that later. And assigning homework and group work like project works are less effective in virtual mode because the breakout rooms sometimes it doesn't work. And also it is difficult to manage by one teacher. It has to come and go, and yes, in every breakout rooms. So it's very difficult for one teacher while teaching. And about the last topic about the concentrations on the teaching of English across the board. I think yes, concentration on the teaching of English will help national and international growth. The globalization invited us to think globally and act locally. It seems the English language teachers associations like NELTA, ELTAI, BELTA, TESOL, IRTFL, and others have already invested huge resources to develop quality human resources for ELT pedagogy, with the deemed result of concentrating on the teaching of English beyond the board. We are using references and textbooks written by non-Nepali writer, foreign writer, IELTS, TOEFL, etc. We should be optimistic that the native and non-native boundary will be blurred no later than sooner, resulting in the global practices on ELT. To enhance quality in ELT, NELTA is exploring opportunities and extending its network to work in collaboration with the various organizations like ELTAI, MELTA, BELTA, and the universities having a similar interest. And I think the way ahead of the beyond the border, we can do the collaborations with the various organizations having a similar interest, such as developing teaching, learning, multilingual and training materials, exchange and sharing of best practices in ELT, and developing a standardized testing for formative and summative evaluations, and also joint venture project like research on these ELT situations and books writing, etc. So I think we know there are challenges. However, time has come to move ahead beyond border, and NELTA has already started its homework. We are working with Sunway University of Malaysia, and there are 4 or 5 countries are involved. I think India is also there, and designing materials for the students of community schools of remote places for the respective countries. The unique thing is about the project is that the materials are going to be developed by the students from the remote places who are deprived of every facilities, and with the support of the teachers from that school. So maybe it's very interesting kind of project beyond border. Okay. And we are working in joint research project on driving the sustainable growth of ELT association through collaborative engagements. So what happened during the COVID and after post-COVID, and what's going to happen, what we are going to plan for the future. So like we are doing this project with the MELTA, Malaysia, and BELTA, Bangladesh. And soon we are going to announce the international conference of NELTA also for 2022, either physical or virtual, and we are in the preliminary phase. I think I have covered everything, Professor. Thank you so much. I will take questions later. If we have questions, we'll take that later, no, Professor? So after the second presentations.
Can we request Dr. Naidu to take over, please?
Vanakkam. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, the esteemed moderator, Professor Paul Guanshekar. Thank you for the warm introduction earlier. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen from Malaysia, and good evening, a special good evening to my fellow presenter, Professor Dewan. It's good to meet all of you virtually, although I can't see the rest of you on camera. It is 7:30 p.m. in Malaysia right now, and as Professor G earlier introduced me to all of you, I'm of South Indian origin and I speak Tamil. My grandparents from both my paternal and maternal side were from India. And I've been involved in English language education since 1981 when I first joined Teacher Training College to study the teaching of English, and subsequently served in many different institutions. And eventually I'm now heading a school, but the school is not the School of English Language Education. It's a School of Pre-University Studies. But nevertheless, I'm very much actively involved in English language education in the country because I'm the secretary of the Malaysian English Language Teaching Association. I would like to thank ELTAI for this opportunity to be here today to take part in this discourse, Asian Perspectives in ELT. Professor Guanshekar just now caught me by surprise by giving me a few conditions. I will try to address them, although they are not in my slide. I'll do that. Vinod, can you please share my slide? All right. The focus of my short presentation today will be English language education in Malaysia in general, looking at the status, the role, the function, and I will also touch a little bit on the reforms that the country has taken since 70s, the kind of reforms that the country has taken, and I'll end with the latest reform, which happened in 2013, and now moving on very strongly, one of the most important reforms that has happened in Malaysia, in my opinion. In terms of position, it's very much similar to many of the Commonwealth countries. English language is taught from preschool right up to a tertiary level. And there's substantial time allocated at the schools for English language education or English language teaching. And teachers are trained in teacher training colleges and universities to serve the purpose. As part of the national curriculum, it's a compulsory subject because there's a lot of emphasis on English language being the language of globalization, the lingua franca of the world. Right. On the whole, I would say that about 50 to 60% of Malaysians are competent in the language. A certain amount of competency is there. But I will say that these are concentrated in urban areas rather than rural areas. I think this should be same across the board in most countries where English is more widely spoken. There's a lot of opportunity for usage and so on. At the same time, I also need to tell you that we have different kinds of school systems in the country. Primarily, it is the Bahasa Melayu or the national language, which is the medium of instruction. But as you may know, we also have Tamil medium schools because of the rich historical influence of Tamils in Malaysia. We also have Mandarin medium schools. And now there are many schools, international schools or private schools, where the medium of instruction is English. Next slide. I can move myself, right? Okay. Right. The status is English as second language, as Professor Paul Guanshekar earlier established, and it is very much embedded in the education ordinance of the country since 1957 when we achieved independence. What happened during that time was, the country's educational system was primarily, governed or managed by, the British civil servants, including civil servants from India, because of their level of proficiency was very high. There were a lot of English language teachers who came from India. But gradually in 1970, the country slowly weaned off that the importance of English. So slowly in 1979, I was one of the last batches of students who actually took what we call as MC, the Malaysian Certificate of Education. It's similar to like Senior Cambridge, right? My brothers took exam, which are called Senior Cambridge. The exam papers were from UK. Eventually, the Malaysian Examination Syndicate took over the assessment of the secondary school and primary schools. But this was slowly weaned out from English. It became Malay, primarily Malay. During my time when I was studying in school, I went to a national type school, Bahasa Melayu. I learned, it was a bilingual kind of education. I learned certain subjects in Malay. I learned science in English. I learned maths in English. There was English language. And the rest of the subjects like history and geography and civics and other subjects like art was taught in Bahasa Melayu. So I was one of the final batches of students who were, really bilingual. In fact, I'm trilingual because I also speak Tamil, although I can't read and write Tamil. But we have many people like this in Malaysia. All right. So this, the status of English as a second language was emphasized again and reaffirmed in the Education Act 1961 and again in 1996. But it's also in the National Education Policy 1970, so that it remains, important to the country's landscape. So one of the reforms, one of the earliest forms of reforms when I was a school teacher in the 80s, is the integrated schools curriculum. This was the year when the country decided to move English language teaching approach or pedagogy from a very structural, grammar-based syllabus, to communicative language. And during that time, this was the buzzword. Communicative language teaching was the in thing. This was the thing that was moving English language education around the world, and especially in the second language setting, because language is the medium for communication, right? It was, the aim was to enable students to be, competent, can communicate orally, in writing as well, both inside school and outside school, right? And as they moved along from primary to secondary, the government had hoped, or the curriculum designers had hoped, that there will be a little bit more proficiency. They can use it in their everyday lives, but they can also use it for knowledge acquisition when they go to tertiary levels, but they can also use in the future workplace if there's the needs. But sad to say, right? Because at that time, although the syllabus was very much, communicative, the examination at the end of primary school, for example, there was an examination called the Standard 6 assessment, the Year 6 assessment, when students take it when they're 12 years old. It was very much a grammar kind of exam, right? There was a lot of emphasis on grammar, right? Very little emphasis on writing or speaking or listening, right? But that slowly changed. That slowly changed as the country began to, look into the curriculum and how the curriculum impacted the proficiency level of students, right? There was at this time, I would say, the beginning of decline of the English language among the population. And I'm saying 50-60%, that's the current, right? In the past, it was, very widely used. There are a lot of English language proficiency, people with English language proficiency in the country. Naturally so, because, the medium of instruction was English. There was this bilingual education. But also we need to understand that the education system in Malaysia is not homogeneous, right? As I told you, we have the vernacular schools where students learn, for example, if a Tamil school student, they learn, Tamil, but they also learn Malay, Bahasa Melayu, which is compulsory, and they learn English, 3 languages, and that the struggle begins, to be proficient enough at all 3 languages, and that is definitely a challenge. While I'm not saying that everybody can manage that, but that's definitely a challenge for a child as young as 7 years old, trying to learn 3 languages simultaneously. So there were some changes done. For example, English was not taught up to, the second part of the year. For example, start off with Tamil first and then slowly moving, introducing a new language and so on and so forth. Then another major reform happened, and this is the one that I would like to talk about a little bit more. This was in 2013 when the country came up with education blueprint, because I think the emphasis was on ensuring that there was a blueprint that charted the country's education pathway, so that the students who come out of the Malaysian school system, the educational system, are indeed competent enough to become global citizens, be good enough to be employed across the world, globally, right? To be globally competitive and so on. And from that integrated curriculum, we moved to something called standards-based curriculum, right? Where achievements are based on standards, certain standards. And this was the beginning of another development, which I will share with you in my next slide. And during this time, there was also something, a major exercise in the country called learners, or the testing of literacy and numeracy, because there was a study done, and it was felt that some students, especially in certain areas in this country where the socioeconomic status is not so good, students were struggling with English proficiency, and they were also struggling with mathematical skills. So these two skills are important to be developed right from the start. We can't, for example, wait until the student is 12 years old and decide, hey, you're not competent enough to take the exam in year 6. Your mathematics skills, you have not gone beyond the multiplication. You can't do division, for example. You can't do complex mathematics problem. And when curriculum designers and policymakers and teachers and educators and teacher educators looked into the problem, if we felt that this started very early, in the very early stages, and so the government came up with a very massive plan, very ambitious plan to do what we call as a screening of numeracy and literacy skill, right? And when the students didn't achieve a particular level, the students were given extra support for English literacy and numeracy, right? In mathematics. So this was going on for a while in Malaysia as well. And then this education blueprint also paved the way for English language and English language education roadmap for Malaysia. Why a roadmap? Okay, one of the things that the roadmap does is this: it provides us with a guidebook, right? It provides us a guidebook not only for teachers but for everybody, every stakeholder who are involved in English language education in the country. That means it starts off from curriculum designers, textbook writers, teachers, teacher trainers, assessment syndicates, and so on. And it allows greater coherence across all these different stakeholders. One of the things that we didn't have previously was that there was no roadmap. There was no a fixed guidebook for people, right? So, different people interpreted it differently. For example, the teacher training was not very much in tandem with what's happening in the schools, for example, right? Or what's happening in the university, for example, or what's needed globally, for example. One example I can give you is we have, exams at when students at Form 5. Form 5 is the 11th year. We also have exams at the 13th year, right? We have slowly moved away from exams in the 6th year, the 6 years of education, and the 9th year of education. We're slowly moving away. We're having more school-based exams now. That's for all the subjects, not English, right? But basically, when a student completes 11 years of education, studying English for 11 years, and coming up with a certificate that says your English is C grade. And for the employer, future employer, or for the university, what does the C mean? What does C mean to Sivabala? What does it mean? What does A mean to Motikala, for example? What does it mean? What can they do? So there was a need to align assessment levels to the CEFR. We felt that the CEFR is one of the things that had global recognition. It measures English. It's not English. CFR is language proficiency at various levels. There are 6 levels: A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. C2 is the near native-like proficiency. So felt that if, let's say, at the end of an 11-year program, Sivabala has C2, everybody's clear what Sivabala can do, because the CFR provides exact standards which we can look at, which we can read, and we can understand, right? And if somebody comes out with B2, for example, it tells you where the student is. So again, not only assessment, so books are written based on these standards. So the roadmap charts the journey of the student from preschool. You start with A0, for example. A0 is the benchmark that was created before A1, and then moved into primary school, A1, A2, and slowly developed. So it provided everyone with a certain amount of direction. Because in the past, I would definitely say that you'll come to 9 years of English education, and the student could have been still at A1. Basic proficiency, which is quite alarming, really, right? Because after 9 years of education, you expect things to, a student to be competent enough to at least communicate. But it didn't happen. It doesn't happen because, of course, of the socio-political situation in the country as well. Right. In conclusion, I would say English education, language education in Malaysia is very important, and therefore it has undergone several reforms, and the reforms in the last 30 years, but many of them were without much success. Slowly, most of the interest tapers off, like the communicative English syllabus. This is due to the various, various socio-political actors that have come into play, factors that come into play in the Malaysian landscape. But however, there's a lot of optimism currently that the roadmap is what is going to set us back on the right path again. And I personally also believe that the roadmap will allow us that kind of coherence that we so need in English language education in the country. All right. I've basically come to the end of my presentation, my formal presentation, but I would like to address some of the questions or the points that was raised by Professor in terms of creative writing. Again, I would say that really about last 30 years, there has been, more and more Malaysian writers in English. But if you want to compare with India, for example, I would say we are still very much behind India, because India English language creative writers are just way beyond anybody. They are winning Booker prizes and so on, and I think you all know that. But nevertheless, I think there are a lot of new writers who have come up, and as you know, Asian English. So there's a specific form of English that we use, the Malaysian English, where lexical borrowing is a bit more common, right? Some words are in English, some words are in Malay. Because the country is multilingual, right? We also have, people, we call it roja. It's like a mixture of lots of things. If you have come to Malaysia, you'll know that the English that we use in formal settings and the English that we use in speaking is just like Singapore. We use a lot of la and so on. So this is also reflected in the books, right? Of course, some of the synthetic structures in Malaysian English and the creative writers also use it to give that flavor, that Malaysian flavor in English. We are poets, right? We are poets. One of the writers, poets, Malaysia has is Dr. Malakai, who was one of our Malta presidents earlier. We have Karim Raslan. We have quite a number. It is growing. There is I would say some a good corpus of English writings in Malaysia, with some good writers as well. All right. In terms of the technology, right? The pandemic has brought us all together in terms of technology. I'm now here with somebody from Nepal and from India. I'm sure among the participants there are people from all over the world, right? But in terms of, I'll just talk about the schools, right? The private education, we do it differently. We use Zoom, we use Teams, and so on. But the schools, which are under the Ministry of Education, our default technological tool is Google Classroom. So there is a contract signed with Google, and Google Classroom is the platform that is used to teach online, right, for students. But there are, of course, lots of problems, right? For example, if a family has 4 children and all of them are in school and they have only one gadget, how do you now manage this? Who learns what? So there is some coordination going on. This whole initiative is called Home-Based Teaching and Learning Approach, right? What the government has done is 30% of lessons for all levels from year 1 up to Form 5, that's the senior Cambridge year, 30% will be recorded and aired as in what we call as Education TV. So 30% of the syllabus is covered in Education TV, 70% is covered by online teaching through recordings, through sometimes they use WhatsApp, but the default is Google Classroom. People use WhatsApp to communicate homework, for example. Some teachers use Facebook and so on. So there's a lot of other platforms used, but the default platform is Google, and all the teachers have accounts, English teachers, maths teachers, every other teacher account. So that's the kind of platform we are using. Of course, the future is hybrid, meaning that when students come back to face-to-face class in October, the government is planning to bring back students. We will have 50% of students in the classroom, the rest are at home, and the lesson is going on the class. It's also transmitted through Google Classroom to the students, and that's the approach that we are also using in the university, right? And it's good to say that there's not been disruption in my own context. In schools, there will be greater challenge because of the urban-rural divide. Some places have no connectivity. Some students may not have the gadgets. All right, with that, I think I more or less covered a few things here. I would like to end by saying that Malaysia is multilingual, multicultural. If you've been to Malaysia, you'll know what I mean, right? We coexist quite well. We have, the east part of Malaysia, the Sabah Sarawak, which is in Borneo, the west part. Despite all that, English language education remains as a very important agenda in the Malaysian education landscape. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Motikala Dewan and Dr. Sivabala Naidu. I think we've now actually received a great deal of information and insights into the teaching of English in particular in the two nations. Just to wrap this bit up, Joseph, can you? Thank you. Very quickly, I thought I'll tell you what has been happening, but using slightly, more technical language. If you listened to what the two speakers said, they were actually addressing all four functions that Kacharu originally kind of designed in the 90s and published in 96. The instrumental function, as we all know, is the use of English in a country's educational system and the use of English as a medium of learning at various stages in the educational system. And obviously, that was what was highlighted, but there were references to the regulative function, the use of English to regulate conduct in domains such as the legal system and governance and administration. The interpersonal function was also referred to, where the use of English as a link language between speakers of various languages in a multilingual society. Precisely what Dr. Naidu ended his presentation with. And lastly, the imaginative function, which is the use of English in creative writing that is manifested in different literary genres. Can we go to the last slide now? Right, thank you. Right. I thought we'll kind of summarize some of the things that were mentioned by the two speakers. It's clear that Nepal and Malaysia are multilingual and multicultural societies, like India is, and it's also clear that there are localized varieties of English in use. You might want to call it what you want, right? But there is Nepali English, there is Malaysian English, and there is Indian English. But interestingly, English is used to impart knowledge, information, wisdom, etc., about local traditions and local cultural values. So seemingly, it seems like a foreign language is being used to disseminate information about local indigenous cultures. You must have also noticed in all three countries and elsewhere, there is occasionally a sense of guilt in the teaching fraternity about using the local languages in the English classroom, but that kind of feeling we notice is now gradually disappearing. I think teachers are coming to terms with the fact that you can use local languages alongside English. And it's also interesting to note that in both Nepal and Malaysia, and of course in India, curriculums, syllabuses, and teaching materials are produced by national agencies or agencies recognized as extremely important educationally, like the Tribhuvan University, to prepare courses and testing systems for the countries. You must have also noticed that no single language teaching method is being used in either of these countries. Very much like India, they have chosen to use eclectic, what we might call hybrid methods of teaching English. And I think that's going to be the way forward, right? And lastly, both of them were optimistic about the future of English because it's easy to go on saying, oh, what has happened to standards of English these days, etc. I think we must stay optimistic about the future of English in Nepal, Malaysia, India, and all the countries represented by our audience. So thank you very much. Now I notice that Joseph has actually relayed the questions that some of the participants have already raised in the chat box. So Shravan, would it be okay if I started by asking one or two questions and then you take over? Is that okay?
Definitely, sir, definitely.
Okay, right. Thank you. This is for both Motikala and Sivabala. Dr. Ramani, one of the very senior ELTAI members and a respected practitioner of English, has this to ask. Has there been any shift in perspective in Nepal and Malaysia on how best to teach English from adopting approaches and methods imported from the West towards developing some homegrown approaches and methods, right? Would you like to respond first, Motikala?
Yes. Thank you, Professor. Actually, question is very, very, yes, relevant and important. When we talk about a westernized or a Western methodology or theories borrowed from the Western or border, across the border, that will be appropriate or not. But we have to take some of the knowledge because it's in the globalizations, we should know what kinds of methods and pedagogies they are using. And we don't have to exactly copy those methodologies and theories here in techniques in our schools and university in teaching, because we have to take some of the chunks, okay, the learnings from there, and we localize it. If they are not appropriate, and Nepal, I don't think Nepal completely follows, okay, those kinds of westernized kinds of ideas and knowledge here. So we take few chunks, which is really appropriate for our country and context, then we localize it, because we can't meet the kind of materials or whatever they already mentioned about what kinds of things you have to use in teaching and techniques in classroom. We can't do that because Nepal is not developed that much. So we take it, but we don't copy it. Thank you, Professor.
Dr. Naidu?
My answer will resonate with what Professor Dewan has shared. It is similar. I find it a bit what we call conflicting to call those Western approaches, right? Because a communicative approach probably is also used in teaching Tamil language, for example, or other vernacular languages. So to call something completely, westernized and that we are aping or copying, I find it a bit a bit contradictory to what I believe in. But as Professor Dewan said, I think it's important to contextualize, that the materials are contextualized. We are not simply taking, a textbook from UK, for example. We're not doing that. As Professor G, you pointed out earlier, that, materials are prepared by us, by our local writers in the local context, with some elements of multiculturalism thrown in. So this is what makes it ours, right? In terms of approach, I think if I say, the primary platform that, Malaysian teachers are using is a learner-centered approach, where learners are placed in the center of the equation, and that it is very activity-based, and teaching is, targeted towards that, to what are the outcomes that the students get at the end of the lesson. So with that, I hope I've answered that question. Thank you.
Can I add one point, Professor Guanshekar? So I would like to add one thing also. In Nepal, through the ELTAI, we are starting to shift the approach. Okay, we are not taking all the Western approaches and methods or strategies. I have already given an example in my presentation that we are working with the different universities and the organizations to create and design or develop our own kinds of materials for our students. Maybe that's one kind of initiative. Let's hope in future it will be a kind of a eye-opener. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time. So could I formally thank the two distinguished speakers and ask Dr. Shravan Kumar to wind up the session, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Before I formally propose vote of thanks, there are two announcements for the upcoming session of ELTAI webinar, as well as ELTAI's 15th International and 51st National Conference also. So our 69th session will be on life skills for personal and professional harmony by Dr. T. Ramachandran, and the session will be moderated by Dr. N.M. Nigam and Dr. Jabba Kusum. And I would like to request all the participants to enroll for this session, as well as register yourself for our upcoming annual conference. May I please request Vinod to, our 15th International and 51st Annual Conference on ELT in India, new trends, new demands. It will be held on 20, 21 and 27, 28 November 2020. Please register on conference21.eltai.in. Once again, I'm repeating, conference21.eltai.in. Please register yourself. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank the speakers, the moderators, and the participants from India and other countries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.